Welcome to Talk Universe. This is our show for Wednesday, November 9th, 2016. And tonight's show is Drone Technology and Warfare. Many people get a real serious interest in drones. There's so many of them in our society today. So many things have changed in robotics, and drones are one of those things. In the past, drones were simply known as RC planes or RC cars, radio-controlled devices, really toys. And many people, many hobbyists would make the things, all sorts of them, and they'd fly them all over the place. Now, drone technology implies there will be microprocessors, some more sophisticated control and more sophisticated operation. Drones today do things that the other ones could never do. In the past, a drone was typically a military model, something used by the Air Force, for instance, such as a pilotless plane that was used as a target for missile testing or weapons testing. Today, this has completely changed. And there's some very interesting things that have emerged as a result. So let's have a look at drone technology. I also want to give a shout out for our listeners in Alberta, Canada, and for our listeners in Brazil, and some of our listeners in the United Kingdom. We have a growing base of listeners, and it's a lot of fun to know that we have people out there listening to this message all over the world. I appreciate all of you. We really look forward to seeing your input in the shows. Send your questions and your comments in. Thanks. Also, in next week's show, we have What's Really on Mars Part 3, and we'll have an interview with an astrobiologist, Barry DeGregorio. And on November 23rd, we have a show entitled Clean Water for the World, where we look at technologies to generate clean water for everyone, everywhere, without any trouble. So let's start right out with the idea. What is a drone? The term actually comes from beehives. A drone is a generic worker, something that actually is dispensable. And the idea came about many years ago when they needed something for target practice. Something with a little bit of autonomy to it has now emerged, and it's a little bit smarter than the things they had in the past. Basically, a drone in the past wasn't able to do anything on its own. The operator would remotely operate it, just like you would a radio-controlled plane or a car. But in effect, the drone was something they would use for target practice. They would send up an aircraft, and then they'd test a missile system with it, see if it was operating properly. And in some cases, they'd use it to carry dangerous ordnance or munitions to a location and then detonate it or set it off. And that meant that nobody had to be near the thing when it went off. Now, the concept of using drones for other activities has actually been around for a very long time, but the technology to make things miniature enough, small enough to be carried by tiny vehicles, not much larger than a mouse or an insect, really hasn't been around for a very long time. There have been things available. They were enormously expensive and difficult to produce, and they have been made. But delivering them reliably on something as tiny as, would fit in your hand, that was very difficult. And so the explosion in toys has directly aided the development of many weapons and spying systems in a very strange and roundabout way. Now, there are two very different branches of government activity that use drone technology today, and they both came about from similar things. Spying and surveillance, and general warfare. There is something called Project Alpha that is being pursued by the Department of Defense that says by 2025 we should have robot soldiers, in fact, armies of robot soldiers that will basically replace human beings. At the same time, spying has been something that's been very covert and quiet for many decades, and very tricky methods of getting information, audio recordings, data recordings, and things of that sort have developed over the years, and some extremely subtle and hard-to-detect things have been developed to make that happen. Today, these things are being combined with toys and things that you can get off the shelf, and there are some wild and interesting advancements that have come about as a result. So it might be useful to go back a few years and look at the beginning of military drones and how they were used and what they did with them, and the development that they went through, and then we'll compare that with the RC modeling hobbyist and what was developed in that field, and then we'll see how the two have converged over time. And the difference between a drone and an unmanned aircraft is also pretty simple. A drone is meant to be recovered, in many cases, at the end of its mission, whereas, let's say, a cruise missile is not. It's a definite weapon and is supposed to be destroyed on impact. Drones have been used to carry and deliver explosives or munitions and then be successfully recovered for use again. So you may wonder when the first pilotless aircraft were built, and it was actually right around the end of World War I. And they used radio control, and they actually had what they called the Hewitt-Sperry automatic airplane. This was something known as a flying bomb during its first flight, and it just showed the concept was workable, that you could have an unmanned aircraft. They were meant to be aerial torpedoes, and you would consider them the first versions of the cruise missile, perhaps. But they used gyroscopes, and the Sperry Gyroscope Company developed the hardware to guide and fly these things. So, end of World War I, that's quite a few decades ago. The period of time was 1916, and by 1917, they actually had the automatic airplane flown for the U.S. Army. And this was the first real development of an aerial torpedo. The Kettering Bug, which was what it's named, was flown in 1918. And although they were successful, they were not developed in time to be used in World War I. Now, they did a lot of development in the next couple of years. And by 1927 to 1929, the Royal Navy actually had pilotless radio-controlled airplanes. And these were used as radio-controlled targets. It was named the de Havilland Queen Bee. This was flown in 1935. And the Queen Bee name is said to have led to the use of the term drone for pilotless aircraft when they're radio-controlled. Now, in the post-World War II period, there were a number of target drones developed specifically for testing. But other things, interesting things happened. During nuclear testing, the American Air Force in 1946 turned 8 B-17 Flying Fortresses into drones for collecting data on radiation. And these would be flown to gather information during tests. So they were actually capable of flying these through nuclear test zones and gathering data safely without having to put anybody at risk in terms of pilot or flight crew or instrumentation crew. And similar things were done as reconnaissance platforms during the 1950s, so that planes could fly into areas and they could do spying, basically. They could listen for radio transmissions or take film strips of the ground or photographs of things going on, and nobody would be at risk. Now, as the value of spying and ever smaller sensors and detecting devices were made, it became pretty clear that if you could make something that could carry, let's say, a camera or a microphone, and it was no larger than an insect, then you'd have a real advantage in situations where you needed covert information. And during the 1970s, the CIA actually built a single-cylinder internal combustion engine so tiny that it powered a Dragonfly, a small Dragonfly-type aircraft. It was laser-guided, and it actually worked pretty well. They said it was extremely impressive on how well it worked. The only issue was it couldn't stay on target very well because a draft or a breeze would move it. And so the project eventually was scrapped. However, they actually did produce a Dragonfly robot that would fit in the palm of your hand. It was powered by a tiny gasoline-powered internal combustion engine. Imagine that. It really makes you wonder what sort of technology is available now, because it's been over 40 years since that was done. Another thing for you to consider, a lot of UFO reports are actually terrestrial surveillance robots used by various law enforcement agencies. Some of them use ducted fans or a pair of helicopter blades that rotate in opposite directions. They're very compact, ball or disc-shaped, loaded with sensors, and they tend to be actually pretty quiet. You may sometimes see them hovering at the ends of runways near airports or in other locations, but they actually do look like UFOs, and they are actually surveillance robots. But this also raises another question, and it's about robots and drones. And many people are fans of shows such as BattleBots and the other robot war programs that come on television. And I like to point out, and I think I mentioned this in a previous show, that these are not robots. These are actually Waldos. A Waldo is a remote teleoperated device. Think about it as having your hand in another place and being able to operate it remotely. In many years past, when they would handle nuclear fuels, they'd do it through a radiation-proof window with a long pair of manipulator arms. And you'd put your hands in a controller or in a glove and move it around, and these arms on the other side would perform the experiments, handling the materials and mixing the compounds and operating the tools to assemble things. And these were Waldos, or telekinetic devices. Now, what you see on BattleBots is just Waldos. They're not robots. An actual robot would have the ability to make its own decisions and run the battle itself and win or lose on its own recognizance. Now, this is nothing new. The first remotely operated vehicles of this sort actually were made in 1898, and they were boats. And Nikola Tesla built a radio control system and built these boats. They were 4-foot-long metal boats, and they were operated remotely by radio control, and he demonstrated them at the World's Fair. And he showed that these things could actually be used to carry things around and perform simple tasks. Now, in 1900, he had a bit of a revelation. In his moment of self-realization, he saw his own mind and body as a machine, an automaton, and he decided that contemporary automatons were just using a borrowed mind, in his words, and responding to the orders from a distant intelligent operator. But he also stated that when asked about the boat's potential as an explosive delivery system, like a remote torpedo, he said, you don't see there a wireless torpedo. You see there the first race of robots, mechanical men, which will do the laborious work of the human race. So even in 1900, Tesla was truly a man ahead of his time, had already built remote-controlled drone boat robots operated by radio, and had demonstrated them a couple of years previously, an astounding achievement. But he also clearly defined and foresaw remotely controlled machinery such as drones and the definition of a race of laboring robots to do the will of mankind. So he did this over a century ago. And while I've focused a lot on the development of drones and the history here, and a lot of the military applications and spy applications at this point, what a lot of people aren't aware of is the consumer drone market last year was nearly $360 million in the U.S. alone. And of course, at this time, there are dozens of different models of drones on the market, and they range from a little over $100 to thousands of dollars. The most popular ones carry video cameras, so people can fly the drones around, get aerial shots. Many of the smaller, very popular models have Steadicam functions that allow you to shoot high-def video from any angle under command. And some of them are smart enough that you put a tag in your pocket and it follows you around and will automatically record anything you're doing and get it on video so that later on you can go back and edit the video up any way you wish. And no matter where you walk, no matter what you're doing, the drone stays focused on you. You are the center of attention, more or less. But the development of drone technology goes in a lot of directions at the same time. Just like anything that's developed, there are always good sides and bad sides. And while I have talked quite a bit about what happens in warfare, and we're going to get down to that in much greater detail in the next couple of segments here, one of the things that people keep forgetting is that if drones are available to people in the street, it's also available to other organizations. And those uses can be questionable sometimes. Many police departments now have the ability to use armed drones that carry stun guns or tasers and use them for crowd control. Countermeasures have already been developed. Many people are worried about the fact that drones flying over their property are violating their privacy, and there are many laws in place to prevent you from shooting them down. In any area that you're in a city, you generally are not allowed to discharge a firearm, and the destruction of private property becomes an issue. You don't know if it's a surveillance drone, if it's your neighbor's kid having some fun. You really don't know. And as a result, there are organizations that have come up with anti-drone methods. Some drones actually carry nets to capture other drones. This seems like a harmless takedown method. In some cases, hawks and other animals have been trained to attack and bring down drones on command as sort of a patrol force. The technology is encroaching on our liberties, and it's also giving us new freedoms. But now, many drones that you buy must be registered by the Federal Aviation Authority. You have to do registration with the FAA in order to operate your drone. Some see this as an invasion of your privacy. In times past, if you had an RC airplane, you really didn't have a whole lot of hoops to jump through. You built the model, you got your license for operating the remote, and off you went. But it's a very different world that we live in now, and then many of these things are coming to the fore at this time. And drones, while being toys for the most part in our civilian society, actually have far-reaching consequences in other ways in the world. And we'll get into spies and devices that can carry weapons and how these things are infiltrating our society, and we'll get full-blown into the warfare aspect after the break here. And here's a question for you to consider. Would you allow registered sex offenders to fly camera drones in your neighborhood? This is Talk Universe. The battlefield can be a forbidding environment, and getting information about the battle itself, the enemy you're fighting, can be very difficult. A lot of people risk personally in the past to get that sort of information, spies, people who would go in and do reconnaissance. But now, by using nothing more than a small plastic model with a motor, or small device similar to a robot, a drone, we can get information of all sorts from behind enemy lines. Many drones go in the past with nothing more than cameras. Then they would move to infrared, sometimes radar mapping, things that would look for senses that the human doesn't possess, information that human beings can't detect. Later, the cameras that they sent in by aerial drones would have infrared film, and they would do things like scan for radio sources or heat sources. Today, a lot of the information we look for is completely invisible to the human being, of course. There are drones that go in and do nothing but listen to radio waves, tap into Wi-Fi networks, listen to microwave signals, and they gather all that information and send it back to our fellows on our side of the line for decoding. They can see what's going on in public communication networks and military communications, and they can even deploy drones now that have the ability to jam those communications and block them from working altogether. Many weapons depend on GPS, Global Positioning System data, to know exactly where they're located and if they're near their target. Some drones carry GPS jamming systems that can actually knock the things out and not allow them to function. Weapons that depend on GPS can lose their bearings and become ineffective. Of course, now weapons have tiny gyroscopes, inertial navigation systems, things that allow them to figure out with a pretty close approximation where they should be, where they actually are located without GPS. So systems are getting more complicated. It is an arms race, but one that develops more intelligent and capable machines. As you can well imagine, the mission time, the lifespan of a drone would be determined by its power supply, and other considerations are taken as well. If you have a drone with a jet engine or a gasoline-powered engine or any sort of loud, noisy propulsion system, it's going to be detected very easily. Obviously, the answer would be to have something electric, something silent. But batteries aren't lightweight, so how do you get around that? Many people would suggest the use of a solar panel, and that's true. There are high-altitude drones that fly for days on end with onboard batteries and solar chargers on the wings. Some of these ultra-lightweight, high-altitude machines are used actually to relay communications without the use of a satellite. You can send and receive covert communications over broad stretches of the territory without any real effort by using these as airborne satellites. But still, battery life can be an issue, and how do you get around that? In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, different varieties of beamed microwave power systems were used to operate aircraft, electric vehicles, and other things remotely. The power is actually sent to them as a beam of microwave energy. On board the drone is a rectifier that converts it back to DC power, where it's regulated and used to charge its batteries and operate its systems. So these sorts of broadcast power systems have actually been in use for a number of decades, particularly in the use of sending power to remote covert hardware such as drone systems. It would be fair to say that today the most common use of drones in warfare is for gathering intelligence, for spying, finding out what's happening behind the enemy lines. We can send in infrared scanners that sit patiently for days on end, looking at the profile of things that are moving around, gather the data, and then send it back in a burst, or send it back in small packets, quietly, under the radar, so to speak. We also have systems that are deployed, dropped from an airplane, hundreds of identical tiny drones that land on the ground, in the trees, and all around the landscape, and then wait. They wait, and they listen. Much of the intelligence that we gather today is done by drones. Many times they're placed in innocuous situations, but now, instead of simply having something floating on the wing or hiding, we can place things in unexpected places. We now have drones, small as insects, that can crawl in a pipe, hide under an eave at a household, stay hidden under some trash on the street. They can lay in wait anywhere, gathering RF information, sniffing the cell phone data from everyone who drives by, gathering all sorts of information on the ground in the most unlikely of places. But while all of this is very useful and it's great to have information, the use of combat drones is on the rise. Many people remember in the last Gulf War, we already had snipers on the ground, remote sniping machines, robots in effect, that go into warfare. They were operated remotely by trained military technicians. Basically, drone operating is a class of the service now. At this point, there are drones involved in delivering explosives, sniping live human beings, and doing surveillance and spying. There are also other drones that actually go in and examine and disarm improvised explosive devices. Some drones already have been used with microphones to detect footsteps and then set off an explosive nearby. Much of this stuff raises a lot of controversy about the morality of using robotics and drones in warfare. But the people who are having to fight a one-ended battle would feel very strongly that having a drone on your side could be a positive thing. Many people feel that by using drones in warfare, we're divorcing ourselves from the horror of military operations. And this is true. In many ways, we lose the perspective of what it's like to actually have to go out and fight hand-to-hand combat. But right now, drones are being developed that actually have the capability of carrying grenade-sized quantities of explosive to a target stealthily, perhaps up a drain pipe, or over an empty field, or sneaking up under the cover of night, without the sounds of an aircraft approaching or the signs of the thermal signature of some soldier in the bushes. So it becomes very difficult to know, are these drones being programmed to target individuals for a reason other than warfare? I know that many people are quite upset about drone strikes killing innocent people, blowing up hospitals, blowing up marriage ceremonies, and many people feel there's an incredible lack of oversight, that some governments seem to have no particular care about who they blow up or where or when. Rules have to be in place to govern warfare just as every other aspect of human life, and even though the Geneva Convention exists, technology has progressed in so many ways that it's often difficult to apply the rules of combat as they were formulated and agreed upon many years ago. For many military and government officials, the use of drones seems to sidestep some of these laws and allow them free hand in ways that they'd never had before. But the fact is, with new technologies and methods, there are actually the needs for greater control so that we don't do something stupid or unaccountable. What stands out very clearly to me is that such a conflict of interests exists in industry and education today. There are companies that are working to produce new mechanical bees to replace failing beehives and bee colonies around the world right now, in the efforts to make pollinators that will replace the insects in case they die. And yet, some of these same companies are working on using this technology to produce machines that can carry gram-sized quantities of high explosive, so that swarms of them may land on an enemy and detonate simultaneously. So imagine being surrounded by a cloud of 200 or 300 tiny bee-like insects, each carrying an explosive, and all of them landing on you and going off at once. This is the sort of technology that's being driven from something that could have been potentially beneficial to something that is outright lethal. And when we combine this with facial recognition or even potentially genetic profiling software, we have the ability to make insect-like warriors that can home in on specific people or a specific individual and take them out. It becomes next to impossible to protect yourself no matter where you're located anywhere on Earth. Now, many companies are working on drone deterrent systems, and other companies are developing drone systems that are made for the individual that allow you to do interesting tasks. Some drones can actually travel up a water pipe and see what's blocking it. Other drones can be used to draw wire through a building in places that would be next to impossible to reach otherwise. Something as difficult as running a fiber optic cable through a cinder block wall which goes around a lot of curves and turns would be an extremely expensive and time-consuming task in some cases. If you don't want to damage the wall or have to repaint afterwards, it makes a lot of sense to have a drone the size of a mouse that can actually drag the wire or the fiber optic cable through the cavities in the wall for you. And in many cases, these things can be operated by your cell phone, so you have the ability to see it from a first-person view as if you were yourself the mouse-sized drone traveling through the wall. Now, this is a fascinating application, and similar advances have made it possible for doctors to see exactly what's going on inside the human body. We can now peer up the blood vessels in your body, we can even look at an aneurysm in the brain, and yet we're still having difficulties trying to figure out what's moral and ethical to do with a lot of drone technology. While it's true that drone technology can actually save us a lot of trouble in warfare, many people feel today that warfare really isn't an answer, that much of it is actually being driven for purposes other than those stated. In the past, when a lot of live information wasn't available and live feeds on the internet didn't exist, It was easy enough to compartmentalize ourselves from those other unknown people on the other side of the world that we were told were a threat to our existence. But today, we know many people from those countries. We see their plight on a daily basis, and we see things that the standard news media generally won't tell you. It's an unusual thing that suddenly we find ourselves capable of identifying with those people who we are told are our mortal enemies. So it makes us question a lot of the things about warfare in general. As for drones, however, even though their greatest use has been in spying and in surveillance as targets and now to deliver munitions and perform sniping functions, we see that they are being outfitted with more and more technology to the point of facial recognition, movement recognition, and of the ability to target people wearing specific items of clothing such as military uniforms. This sort of technology can easily get out of hand. But we also see drones that are setting up in swarms and working together to do specific tasks. One large theme park has already had its airspace cleared by the FAA to allow the application of hundreds or thousands of drones simultaneously. Many of them operate in a swarm, each carrying a single brilliant colored LED, and allow the generation of graphic light displays in the sky that float around, reconfigure, and can generate nearly any image on demand. Think of them as living, glowing fireflies that can line up on command and produce an image for you. Now imagine putting this sort of technology to work to spread messages, or to even look for survivors in wreckage. This sort of swarm technology between hundreds or thousands of tiny robots or drones working together can allow us to perform tasks that would otherwise be impossible. And in the civilian world, search and rescue operations could be greatly simplified by deploying a couple of hundred drones over a search area. If they were equipped with infrared or body heat sensors, it wouldn't take long to locate missing people in the wild. This sort of technology also can be used for many other things as well. As many people are aware, Amazon and other large companies are now looking to deliver goods to your doorstep, and many restaurants are looking at delivering fast food directly to your doorstep. So drone technology has many positive capabilities as well. It can deliver medications in places that are otherwise difficult to reach, or it can do it very quickly, where it might not be economical or resource-friendly otherwise. Imagine being on a distant island and unable to get communications or materials delivered any other way. A drone could easily fly a few miles over the ocean and reach you there. Because we are creatures of convenience and we like things delivered to our doorstep, we like the ability to get online and order something and have it appear within a day or less. We find ourselves falling into a world where the sort of information that makes it possible has become very widespread. Every cell phone has a GPS, and smart watches do as well. But this also means that the technology to create smartphones and smart watches has also been incorporated in drone development. Now anyone can go into a store and buy a drone that fits in their back pocket. They pull it out, it unfolds, and it hovers in midair and photographs them, or films them, or videos them to be more precise. This sort of technology has now been used to make many videos of people doing outrageous things, such as parkour experts, or paragliding, or kayaking, and having a viewpoint that you never could have had any other way. After all, nobody can simply float alongside you with a camera when you're doing something outrageous. But it won't be long before some madman realizes that by having thousands of drones, each carrying something lethal, they can do something truly horrendous. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that just as a drone can deliver a pizza, or a burrito, or a dose of medication, it could also take something as terrifying as nerve gas, or a disease agent or toxin directly to the person they're looking for. By arming ourselves with all the information carried in the smart cards and chips in our wallet and our cell phones and all of our personal devices, we've actually painted bullseyes on ourselves. And don't forget that there is a definite push to get a microchip of identification qualities inside every person on Earth at some point. Once this happens, we're pretty much locked into a system where, on command, we can be located anywhere in the world and dealt with in whatever way some authority feels is necessary. This is not a smart move. I'm a person who doesn't carry a cell phone very often unless it's necessary for a job, and it isn't out of paranoia, it's just simply I don't want to be reached sometimes. But with the exploding cloud of personal information surrounding every one of us, and with the growth of drone technology and the unknown intentions of many people in governments and industries around us, it really makes us ask the question, do we really want this sort of technology all linked together into one huge, massive front? More after the break. This is Talk Universe. It's predicted within the next 5 years that almost all military aircraft will have drone pilots, that we will be disposing of the human pilot altogether because the G-forces and loads on the aircraft would be fatal if not damaging to a living human pilot. It's also estimated by 2025 that this country will have a standing robot army of millions of robotic soldiers. It is not known just what the state of some of the other countries developing robotic and drone warriors is at this point. There is some good information, and there have been treaties and agreements signed between different military installations around the world. Different organizations have different goals, and the technology required is immense. Most of it degenerates into artificial intelligence, finding the right algorithms, making it work as you expect, being able to make autonomous machines. Then we move from drones to actual military robots. At this point, we have to ask ourselves just what our goals are. Who are we making the world safe for? At this point, every country in the world has pretty much become very interdependent for commerce and resources. It doesn't make any sense for us to find some section of the population and excise them or constantly blow them up. Drone technology actually brings with us the ability to negotiate things, to bring a peaceful settlement. And yet we don't see a lot of efforts being made in those arenas. Years ago, when nuclear weapons became the major threat, that at the push of the button the world could be annihilated, some people thought about this and realized it was much more reasonable to try and work our differences out, or at least to isolate until things could cool off. I can hope that science and technology will help cooler heads prevail. Consider the positive things that can be done with drone technology. Imagine using millions of drones scattered over the countryside to clean up litter and start putting things back in order. Or imagine drones being used not just to pollinate flowers and help grow fruits and vegetables, but actually to spread and disperse the seeds and make sure they're planted properly. With this technology, we actually have the ability to create armies of drones that recover forest areas that have been trashed, that actually recover desertified areas where the sand is encroaching and dryness is spreading, and instead try to spread composting and irrigation and grow new swaths of grassland and then eventually forest land. Drones have so many possible applications besides those of warfare because they allow us to spread our actions over a huge area of the ground. Nature has always used this method, millions of copies of something doing the same task. But mankind has always used a hammer-blow approach. We generally resort to things like spraying large areas with a chemical or running heavy machines all over the place, or taking piecemeal approaches to projects. With drone technology, we actually have the ability to amplify our efforts and perform something beneficial with a very low impact on the environment around us. If we were really an intelligent species, we'd put our efforts into doing something along these lines. Why not create an army of drones that cleans up landfills or pulls the plastic out of the oceans? We could easily make drones that can pollinate flowers. Why couldn't we easily make drones that clean up waste areas? You see, having this sort of technology in our hands means we have to actually look at the possibilities of cleaning up a lot of the damage that we've done. You can well imagine that the first versions of these things would probably be used to clean up your yard or to do household tasks like keeping the carpet clean. Now, anybody can buy one of those floor vacuuming robots, a Roomba or something similar, but they have a very difficult time on anything other than a hard, smooth surface in most cases. Keeping a carpet clean is a job that would be better done by something like intelligent ants. We can imagine having something like a swarm of cleaning ants that only comes out at night when nobody's walking in a room and picks up all the trash for us automatically. But the same sort of a project can be carried out to keep your lawn up, or to grow your vegetables, or to keep the house painted. You see, we often pictured robots in the future as man-sized or larger, moving around doing all these jobs on command. But in reality, it makes a lot of sense to use insect-type machines to do the same things. In this case, if a few of them break, it doesn't really matter because you still have a large swarm of them in operation. So a broken machine doesn't put you out of business. It only makes the task a little bit slower. And consider the following. The sign of maturity of a technology isn't its use in warfare or combat or subversion. A mature technology is one that is imported into the civilian sector and turned into something beneficial. So drone technology does have its roots in warfare in so many ways, and it's been very beneficial over the years. It's an unfortunate fact that we still have wars in our world, but the fact is it will probably continue for many years to come. Yet drone technology allows us to make a lot of this unnecessary and to bring great improvements to our personal lives as well. I can't think of a better use for a weapon than to be turned into a tool of peace and production. Now, my book recommendations are two this time. The first is called Domesticating Drones, the Technology, Law, and Economics of Unmanned Aircraft Systems. This book was written by Henry Parrott Jr. and Elliot Sprague, and is published by Taylor and Francis. It's about 416 pages. And it's a very interesting read on how we're going to bring drones into our personal lives rather than using them for destruction. There's another very simple book called Building Your Own Drones by John Bachtel by Pearson Education. And it's an ebook, 272 pages. And it tells you step by step how to build your own drone. That's very much like a tutorial for building an RC airplane or something along those lines. And I think that a lot of people who are hobby-minded will be very interested in seeing what's inside this one. And I can tell you as a longtime robotics and electronics hobbyist that a drone really isn't that difficult. A lot of the systems you can buy right off the shelf these days, you're going to have some motor or moving system of some sort. In the case of most drones, they fly around. You're going to have effectively 3, 4, 5 rotors or so. You're going to have a navigation and control system that operates the motors, some sort of a lightweight battery for it, and a remote control system, whether it's an app on your cell phone or it's a handheld controller. But the materials are mostly lightweight composites, plastics or graphite or something along those lines. So they're small, they're lightweight, and they're easy to program and operate. I've seen kids do amazing things with drone helicopter systems. And there are some interesting art displays being made using drone technology now as well. For people who want to get into drone technology and don't have the patience or skill to assemble one, there are a number of drones available for under $40 or $50 right now. Some are even carried by Walmart and Home Depot. I've seen quadcopter drone sets for around $30. So they're a lot of fun. They charge up, they run for a few minutes, and then you have to recharge them again. But they're definitely a lot of fun to play with. They're tiny helicopters, basically. Now, in recent times, there have been forecasts of gloom and doom financially, and there has been talk about robots displacing people from the working market and AI systems displacing people. And yes, this is all a disaster. One of the recommended remedies is to place many people on a guaranteed minimum income. What strikes me as odd is that the people still feel the need for money to be the driving force behind the economy instead of resources or abilities. So I'm going to make a suggestion. If we were to get to the point where we think that people should have a basic income, why wouldn't we get to the point where we provide a basic education as well that gives them specialized skills so that perhaps they could have the ability to compete a little more effectively? And instead of money, wouldn't it make sense to, at least in part, give people 3D printers that produce the things they need, or drones that produce the tasks and the efforts that they need to get things done? You see, in an ideal future, with all the technology we have, that technology would be working for us. Money wouldn't necessarily be needed at all. If you were living 150 years ago, you would find that you would grow what you needed, or make what you needed, or trade with your neighbors. We're in a position today where that same principle could well apply. You wouldn't need money. You would simply have your home, have your machines that produce things, and your machines that do the jobs, and you would direct it, and you'd live your life. I don't see how that's so different from the agrarian living of 2, 3, 5, 10 centuries ago. To be honest, it's a very much more natural sort of way of living than living in a 9-to-5 job sort of environment. I think a real sign of success would be when the local university sponsored a project to make drones grow a vegetable field. Now that sounds like something that could be really interesting. Perhaps a project to have the class come out with their drones and clean up a weeded field full of trash. We need to have initiatives and projects that get kids thinking about how this can be done. A lot of the adults aren't, let's say, jaded or sour on the technology. A lot of them simply don't understand it fully. Kids really do. They get it. They are new to the world, and this is what they know. And they pick up on the idea of drones and their capabilities pretty darn quickly. What we need to do is get these things in the mix. We've got to get drone technology in the hands of kids and show them what they're capable of, and then let their imaginations run. We really do need the equivalent of a track meet or a sewing circle, but we need it with high tech. Because if we don't do something like this soon, we're going to get farther and farther behind, and somebody in some other country, some bright kids are going to come together and do it, and they're going to leave us in the dust. Now, I don't mean this to spur on an arms race of sorts, because we see enough of those as it is. But I think that the time that we have to set things right is growing thin. We've got to do things before time runs out. This is one of the technologies, drone technology, along with 3D printing and new energy technologies, and some of the biotechnologies that will really set the tone over the next 10 years. I'd put my money on drones because they're here now, and anybody can get their hands on them. So if you really want to see what's coming, look at drones. Let your imagination fly, and think about what you could do. If you had an army of drones at your disposal, what would you have them do? Anybody could live like a king. Your property could be clean, your house painted, everything always running at top efficiency. If your machines were all programmed to do exactly the jobs you need to keep things maintained. We're maybe 5 years away from that sort of automation. Knowing that, we should be able to prepare for it right now and make the best of it when it arrives. So drone technology basically has its birth in warfare and surveillance, ends up in the hands of some hobbyists. Then you throw in the microprocessor and lightweight materials and better batteries and sensor systems. And before it, you've got universally smart, capable, insect-like machines that can go out in swarms and handle jobs that nobody would ever want to put their hand to. I think that when you start thinking about it in this way, you begin to see the power and the flexibility of what drones can do for us. Now, for any of you who have purchased a drone or are going to get a drone or build a drone, you might want to go online and look at drone registration. You can look it up in Google or just about any of the search engines. And there are a number of places that you can go online and get your drone registered with the FAA. Most of them run, about $5 or so for the year. And it sets up for classes, drones above or below certain weight limits and with certain ranges. So don't get yourself in trouble. This is something that you need to do. And if you do buy a drone, keep in mind that your neighbor's privacy is important. If you're flying around with a camera, hovering outside somebody's window, you're bound to get caught and you're going to get in trouble. And while we're on the subject, don't do something stupid like arming your drone or put pointy things on it or fly it up around animals or into a power line. And certainly don't fly it in the path of an aircraft. The FAA regulations are pretty strict about that. There have been some cases of collisions between drones and aircraft that have been pretty unhappy. So, use your common sense and just try to be a good example. I know that it seems that some people's only purpose in life is to serve as a bad example. Don't be that guy. Now, what if you get a drone and you don't register it? Well, registration is only $5, as I mentioned. But, if you don't register it, what's going to happen is probably nothing. Probably nothing. On the other hand, the FAA rules say that drone operators who fail to register could face up to a $277,500 fine in civil and criminal fines, and or as many as 3 years in prison. It's an interesting thing to think that what was originally in a radio-controlled plane or something, if not registered, could get you in that much trouble, but that is the world we're in, and so just to be sure that you are aware of the possible civil and criminal penalties, I do have to mention that. Also, what I mentioned earlier about drones being used in light displays, Intel is actually making a move to replace fireworks with drones. Certainly it's going to be visually appealing. They've already set a world record for the number of cooperative drones in a flight, and it's amazing to see. So that's one of the really cool benefits of having this sort of technology, to be able to do things nobody's ever done before. And as I mentioned before, that same sort of technology could plant a forest or take care of crops or monitor the environment. So yes, this is a war-born toy and something that has grown into a civil thing, something we all have access to. But it makes our lives a little richer, and I always fall back to the same statement. This is one of those things that contributes to it. We have everything we need to make everything we'll ever need. And scarcity is a myth. Just think of the wealth around us today. It's unimaginable what it would be to live 1,000 years ago compared to the advantages and toys and the fun we have today, and the potential to do so much human good and end suffering. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week with another fascinating subject. This is Talk Universe. Have a great evening.